From the School of Life Foundation, this is another episode of What You Given, a broadcast based on the invitation, find what brings you joy and match it to the needs of the world. This becomes your gift. Everyone has something inside of themselves to give, and I want to know, what are you giving? In my interviews, we meet people from all walks of life. I'm Jack Rolfe, and on today's show, I'm going off script. I read a letter today that touched me. It provided me one of those inspirational moments in life that I talk about on the show. And I'd be a hypocrite if I did not have the courage to act upon what I felt as I read it. This letter was sent out for the media from Olena Zelenska, the First Lady of Ukraine. She titled the letter, "I Testify." So I felt impressed to go through this letter and then share my thoughts and hopefully get your own thoughts to be stimulated. So bear with me. Listen through. Please listen through. I think the best way to do this is I will say I quote when I'm starting to read and end quote when I stop, and then share my thoughts and then repeat it that way, because I may stop after reading a paragraph or something to that matter. So I start out, I quote, "Recently, an overwhelming number of media outlets from around the world have reached out with requests for interviews. This letter serves as my answer to these requests and is my testimony from Ukraine. What happened just over a week ago was impossible to believe. Our country was peaceful. Our cities, towns, and villages were full of life. On February 24th, we woke up to the announcement of a Russian invasion. Tanks crossed the Ukrainian border. Planes entered our airspace. Missile launchers surrounded our cities." End of quote. Okay, listeners, can you imagine our country, the United States, or if you're listening from another country, insert the name of your country. If you are fortunate to be living peacefully and citizens are full of life, and then one morning you wake up to the announcement that your country's being invaded. I can't even imagine those thoughts. But as I think about it, I think if a country's being invaded, our world is being invaded. I quote, "Despite assurances from Kremlin-backed propaganda outlets who call this a special operation, it is in fact the mass murder of Ukrainian citizens. Perhaps the most terrifying and devastating of this invasion are the child casualties. 8-year-old Alice, who died on the streets while her grandfather tried to protect her. Or Polina from Kyiv, who died in the shelling with her parents. 14-year-old Arsenia was hit in the head by wreckage and could not be saved because of an ambulance could not get to him in time because of intense fires. When Russia says that it is not waging war against civilians, I call out the names of these murdered children first. End of quote. All right, listeners, I have children, I have grandchildren, you have children, grandchildren, you have neighbors' children. Can you even imagine them being harmed in such a way? I quote, "Our women and children now live in bomb shelters and basements. You have most likely all seen these images in the metro stations where people lie on the floors with their children and pets trapped beneath. These are just consequences of war for some. For Ukrainians, it's now a horrific reality. In some cities, families cannot get out of the bomb shelters for several days in a row because of the indiscriminate and deliberate bombing and shelling of civilian infrastructure. The first newborn of war saw the concrete ceiling of the basement. Their first breath was acrid air of the underground, and they were greeted by a community trapped and terrorized. At this point, there are several dozen children who have never known peace in their lives." End of quote. Listeners, is that the world that we want children to be born into? I quote, "This war is being waged against the civilian population and not just through shelling. Some people require intensive care and continuous treatment, which they cannot receive now. How easy it is to inject insulin in the basement, or to get asthma medication under heavy fire, not to mention the thousands of cancer patients whose essential access to chemotherapy and radiation treatment have now been indefinitely delayed." End of quote. Listeners, I have asthma. I have medication for my asthma. It's a horrible thing when I can't have that medication. I quote, "Local communities on social media are full of despair. Many people, including the elderly, severely ill, and those with disabilities, have been cut off, ending up far from their families and without any support. War against these innocent people is a double crime. Our roads are flooded with refugees. Look into the eyes of these tired women and children who carry with them the pain and heartache of leaving loved ones and life as they knew it behind. The men bringing them to the borders, shedding tears to break apart their families, but bravely returning to the fight for our freedom. After all, despite all this terror, Ukrainians do not give up." End of quote. Listeners, wherever you live, can you imagine taking your children, your women, to the borders and departing, not knowing where they will go or how they will be or how you will end up? I quote, "The aggressor, Vladimir Putin, thought that he would unleash on Ukraine, but he underestimated our country, our people, and our patriotism. Ukrainians, regardless of political views, native language, beliefs, and nationalities, stand in unparalleled unity." End of quote. I pray that we could have that unity within our country, within every country, within the world. I quote, while Kremlin propagandists brag that Ukrainians would welcome them with flowers as saviors, they have been shunned with Molotov cocktails. I thank the citizens of the attacked cities who have coordinated to help those in need, those that keep working in pharmacies, stores, public transportation, and social services, showing that in Ukraine, life wins. I acknowledge those that have provided humanitarian aid to our citizens, and thank you for your continued support. And to our neighbors who have generously opened their borders to provide shelter for our women and children, thank you for keeping them safe when the aggressor has rendered us unable to do so. End of quote. Listeners, this beloved First Lady, who I automatically gained deep respect for, still has the heart to express appreciation. Believe me, gratitude can change the world. I quote, to all the people around the world who are rallying to support Ukraine, we see you. We're here watching, and we appreciate your support. Ukraine wants peace, but Ukraine will defend its borders, defend its identity. These it will never yield. In cities where shelling persists, where people find themselves under debris, unable to get out of basements for days, we need safe corridors for humanitarian aid and evacuation of civilians to safety. We need those in power to close our sky. Close the sky, and we will manage the war on the ground ourselves. I appeal to you, dear media. Keep showing what is happening here and keep showing the truth in the information war waged by the Russian Federation. Every piece of evidence is crucial. And with this letter, I testify and tell the world, the war in Ukraine is not a war. Somewhere out there, this is a war in Europe, close to all the borders. Ukraine is stopping the force that may aggressively enter your cities tomorrow under the pretext of saving civilians. Last week, to me and my people, this would have seemed like an exaggeration, but it's the reality we're living in today, and we do not know how long it will last. If we don't stop Putin, who threatens to start a nuclear war, there will be no safe place in the world for any of us. We will win because of our unity. Unity toward love for Ukraine. Glory to Ukraine. End of quote. Listeners, as you know, this show is normally about finding what brings you joy and matching it to the needs of the world. And it's hard to completely focus on that, knowing that there are so many people not even capable at this moment of feeling joy in their life. But yet maybe that joy can come from you and I. It could be as simple as pausing right now and offering a prayer in whatever manner you pray. Praying for our brothers and sisters in Ukraine. Having them on top of mind as you, wherever you're at, may still be living in freedom. Maybe it is a donation. Maybe it is a smile to a Ukrainian neighbor. Maybe it is taking in a refugee. Maybe it is what your soul speaks to you. There is a need in the world, a need for peace, a need for unity, a need for divine guidance and intervention. My heart swells. My eyes are wet as I speak my plea to you. The First Lady titled her letter as I testify. I title my comments today, The Prayer. Remember, your heart feels for you. Your mind reasons for you. But your soul speaks to you. Are you listening? Did you listen today? If so, what did you hear? What did you learn? And will you now have the courage to act upon what you felt? It is time to move upward and to move onward and to ask yourself, what you given?